Is it good now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'd like to introduce my book a little bit first. It's a historical novel that starts in communist Poland in 1981 and continues to the modern era. And this time period in Poland is very specific because it is when martial law was announced in Poland, which is very relevant considering what's happening in the States right now. So the economic situation was very poor. People were hungry. There was a scarcity of food. They had food rations. There were no products, so no clothing for the children. And women were protesting in the streets, and people were striking in factories. Students were striking. Solidarity movement had started, and the Soviets told the Polish general, if you don't take care of it now with your own army, we're gonna go into Poland. So on December 13, 1981, martial law was announced, and then immediately after, the military police started arresting Solidarity and union workers. Radio stations and TVs were inactivated. Schools and universities were closed, and workers' unions were suspended. I was 4 years old at the time, living in Warsaw with my parents, and they managed to secure passports and visas for us just before that time to emigrate to Australia. So I could have been an Australian beach babe with a surfer boyfriend. But unfortunately, the borders were closed, so we couldn't emigrate. So we're stuck in Poland, and we only managed to emigrate 10 years later, in '92, to Canada. And actually, for the first 3 years of my life in Canada, I lived near here on Carlton Street, opposite Allen Gardens. And also, I went to Jarvis Colleges for 3 years. So the story in my book is the story of people like my parents, people who tried to escape during that time. And what interested me in this specific time period is that during the 2 laws of martial law, there were 15 attempts at hijacking by regular people, by people with families and no weapons who would hijack Polish airplanes and try to escape to the west and land in West Berlin. And one specific attempt was made by women with children and their husbands, and there were 50 people on the airplane, and all of them knew about it. There were also secret police, military force on the airplane. So this is the story in my novel. And what was interesting about the story is that there were no interviews with women involved. All the information was about the men. So I had to invent the stories of the wives and wonder, how did they decide to do this? How did they decide to risk their lives of their children and other people on the airplane and do it? Were they forced, or did they want to do it and force their husbands? So that part of the story is invented. What happens on the airplane during the hijacking is based on actual facts. So the characters are fictional. So I read an excerpt now that happens in the winter just after the martial law was announced, and one of the characters has to get medicine for her child. The streets were empty and peaceful. Large flakes of snow fell slowly around her, sticking to her hair and the fairy trimmings of her sheepskin collar and cuffs. Ivona was too worried to notice the beauty of snow on the sidewalks, and how the tracks of shoes and dog paws in the whiteness looked like magic signs. An image of the Narnian forest inside the wardrobe flashed through her mind. She had been reading the book to Basia in the evening, in the orange glow of her lamp, but she was preoccupied with the task at hand, and the fleeting association disappeared in the fearful and scary thoughts spiraling through her head. The city was eerily quiet, except for the occasional screech of tramway trails. People must be hiding in their apartments, digesting the news of their late weekend breakfast. In the distance, the door slammed, and Harry's footsteps were muffled by the snow. Someone called out, and then it was silent again. Ivona focused on the crunch of snow under her boots, which she had been so lucky to buy just last week, and they were a perfect size, a rare joy indeed. Jerzy, her husband, wore the same leather ankle boots all year round. All she could do was knit him a pair of warm socks with the yarn she had unraveled from an old sweater. There was enough left to make hats and mittens on a string for Basia and Radek. Zofia at the hospital didn't need any. Ivana wiped the wetness accumulating under her nose. She loved watching how Basia pulled one of her mittens out of her sleeve and pretended it was a little red dog on a leash, and Alex chased it in the snow like the kid in the Soviet stop-motion animation they had recently watched. Ivana marched down Rakowiecka Street towards Puławska, which had several pharmacies. As she passed the long cement wall of the prison, Ivana picked up her pace. Pale patches of paint on its dirty yellow surface covered old graffiti. She recognized from the shape of the spot that it had said Solidarność. Two rows of loosely colored barbed wire stretched on top of the wall. The place gave her the creeps. She half expected to hear the cries and moans of the Solidarity members and political prisoners they tortured inside. She couldn't help imagining how they would break the other's slim fingers if they arrested him. She ran, slipping, along the wall until she stopped breathless at the next intersection. In front of her, she saw a tramway stop sign with its red T on a yellow background with the schedule underneath, and behind it, the yellow barrier fence preventing people from jaywalking across the tracks to the largest movie theater in Warsaw. A big neon sign, Kino Moskva, on top of the building, wouldn't be lighted until evening. On weekends, they screened films and cartoons for children, but the square in front of the cinema was now empty. The movie playing was Apocalypse Now, she read from the green print on the large screen above the entrance. Ivana wanted to take her class to see it after they finished reading Heart of Darkness. She instinctively hid behind a maple tree growing out of a square patch of ground cut in the sidewalk. In front of the theater, obscuring the two stone lions at the main entrance, a large armored vehicle was parked. Usually would know exactly what it was called, but to her it looked like a tank. Soldiers moved around it, and tire tracks spiraled in the snow. Don't be ridiculous, Ivana muttered to herself. They're not going to show you. She felt a snowflake melt on her lips. A few more attached themselves to her lashes, and she blinked them away. You are a Polish mother looking for medicines for a sick child, not the enemy. And they are Polish soldiers, ours, not Soviet. Who knows, maybe Arek is one of them. Ivana smiled at the memory of Basia's infatuated gaze on her 18-year-old godfather in his new uniform. Ivana crossed the street, slippery with melting snow. She had to walk past the tanks to get to the pharmacy. She clutched her purse, handled so hard her fingers hurt. An older woman in a red scarf smiled at her furtively and skulked away. Ivana tried to look like a regular person, not the sweaty, trembling woman with a racing heart whose husband was in solidarity and was participating in a strike at the very moment. Years later, Ivana would recognize herself in the famous photograph. There she was, in her sheepskin coat, the collar lifted around her face, her purse hanging on her arm. She remembered being afraid of the men who came out of nowhere to go at the vehicle, wondering if they were members of the SB, which is the secret police. She had looked down at the melting snow and hurried away. It struck her how, by a complete chance, by being there at the exact moment when Chris Niedenthal pressed the shutter. Not a moment earlier or later, she became immortalized for all history, like a fly caught in amber. She preferred to remain at the periphery outside the frame of big events. And that photograph is actually a real photo. That was also a spark that ignited the idea for the novel. It's a very famous photo taken by a Polish-British journalist on the day the martial law was announced. And of course, street photography was forbidden. And it's a story like from a James Bond movie. So he took those photos, and the same night, illegally, he went to the train station, and because he knew there would be a train leaving to West Germany. And he had to film like 10 rolls of film, and he kept asking people who would take it to West Germany. And he found a West German student who was unaware of how dangerous it was. He gave him the film, and that student smuggled the film out of Poland into West Germany. And that photograph is the movie theater. It's called Theater Moscow, which is not a Polish name, but like a Soviet name, right? And the movie is Apocalypse Now, which translated literally in Polish was the time of apocalypse. So the picture with the tank in front of the theater and the title, it really illustrated the paranoia and the fear of that time. So that photograph was published in Newsweek and in Der Spiegel, and yeah, it's very famous.
Wow.
So that's it. Thank you.